Amara's POV. Busan National University looked exactly the same. And somehow that felt strange. Students still crossed the courtyard in clusters with coffee cups and backpacks. Conversations drifted through the morning air beneath the sound of traffic outside the campus gates. Music played faintly from somebody's phone near the student center, while several exhausted graduate students sat crowded around outdoor tables, pretending they weren't dying academically. The world had continued moving while Amara disappeared. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. Amara adjusted the strap of her bag nervously as she stood near the entrance gates, staring across campus. "You're overthinking." Changho's voice came calmly from beside her. Amara glanced sideways at him. "That's easy for you to say. Nobody kidnapped you for 3 days, and then dropped you back into graduate school like everything's normal." Changho considered that for a second. Fair. That answer caught her off guard enough to earn a small laugh. The sound eased some of the tension tightening inside her chest immediately. Changho stood beside her dressed far too well for an ordinary campus morning. Black coat, dark slacks, clean white shirt beneath it. Completely composed despite the fact that half the campus had already started staring at him the second they stepped through the gates together. Amara noticed every single look. Unfortunately, so did the bond. "You feel smug." Changho glanced down at her with zero shame. "You noticed. You're enjoying this." "I'm enjoying the fact that you're safe." "That is not the only thing you're enjoying." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Amara hated how attractive that expression was. Several students passed nearby before slowing almost immediately once they recognized Changho. Whispers followed seconds later. Amara caught fragments of conversation drifting through the crowd as they crossed deeper into campus. "Is that him?" "That's Changho. They said he owns half the district near the harbor." "No, I heard his family." Amara groaned softly under her breath. Changho looked entirely unbothered. "Of course he did. What exactly have people heard about you?" she asked quietly. Changho adjusted the strap of her bag higher onto his shoulder without even asking before answering. "Depends which rumors you mean. You carrying my bag around campus is not helping. You're injured." "I am bruised." "You're still healing." Amara narrowed her eyes at him. "You sound married already." Changho looked down at her calmly. "That bothers you." The bond pulsed warmly before she could even answer. "Traitor." They crossed the central courtyard together, while more students openly stared now. Some recognized Amara immediately. Others looked between her and Changho with growing curiosity. One group of girls near the library practically stopped walking entirely once Changho passed them. Amara noticed that too. "Unfortunately. You know," she said lightly, "women are staring at you." Changho didn't even look around. "I know." Amara blinked once. That was a suspiciously confident answer. "I can hear their heartbeats changing." She stopped walking so abruptly that Changho almost kept moving without her. "You can what?" His expression shifted immediately. Changho looked genuinely confused for half a second before realizing what he just admitted casually. Amara stared at him. "You never told me that." Changho looked mildly uncomfortable now. "I didn't think it was important." "That is insane information." A quiet laugh escaped him, and the sound hit Amara embarrassingly hard. Because before the kidnapping, Changho almost never laughed openly around anyone. Now she was hearing it more often. The bond warmed gently between them as they continued walking. Amara noticed the shift immediately. Not because the emotion came from her, because it came from him. Changho liked this. Walking beside her openly. Being seen with her. Having her near him where he could physically verify she was alive and untouched. The realization softened something inside her chest. As they approached the graduate studies building, Amara slowed slightly again. The anxiety returned immediately. Professor Min missed assignments. Questions. The very real possibility that her life had become too complicated to fit back into normal routines anymore. Changho noticed the shift beside her instantly. "You can still leave." Amara looked up at him. "And do what?" "Go home." The answer surprised both of them, because neither of them believed he meant America anymore. Amara stared at him quietly for a second before shaking her head. "No." Changho studied her carefully. Amara took a slow breath and looked toward the building entrance again. "I came here for a future," she said softly. "I'm not letting fear take that away from me now." Something deep in the bond tightened warmly at her words. Pride. Support. Something even deeper beneath both. Changho stepped closer until his hand brushed lightly against the back of her neck, near the fading mark hidden beneath her hair. The touch steadied her instantly. Then I'll walk in with you. Amara looked up at him carefully. You really weren't joking about not letting me out of your sight, huh? No, Changho answered calmly. I wasn't. Raylan. The second Amara stepped into the graduate student lounge, chaos erupted. Oh my God. Amara barely had time to react before Raylan slammed into her hard enough to nearly knock her backward into the doorway. Jesus. Amara laughed breathlessly as Raylan wrapped both arms around her neck. I can still bruise. I do not care. Raylan snapped immediately, pulling back just enough to look at her face. Do you know how close I came to filing an international missing persons report? Amara blinked once. That dramatic. Amara, you vanished. The humor faded from Raylan's expression almost instantly after that. Real fear settled there instead. You stopped answering your phone. Nobody knew where you were. Professor Min was asking questions. I thought somebody trafficked you. Amara stared at her quietly for a second before pulling her into another hug. I'm okay, she said softly. Raylan held onto her tighter for another few seconds before finally stepping back again. Then her eyes narrowed immediately. What happened to your neck? Amara froze. Damn it. Raylan stepped closer without waiting for permission, brushing dark curls away from the fading mark beneath Amara's hair. That is not a hickey. Amara nearly choked. Could you say that louder? Oh my God, Raylan whispered dramatically. It is a hickey. It is not. Raylan crossed her arms instantly. Then why do you look guilty? Before Amara could answer, movement near the doorway caught Raylan's attention. And the second she saw Changho standing there, everything stopped. Raylan blinked once, then twice, then very slowly looked back toward Amara. No, Amara already knew that tone. No, she repeated cautiously. Raylan pointed directly at Changho. Absolutely not. Changho looked entirely calm beneath the accusation. Amara, unfortunately, started laughing. You disappeared for days, Raylan whisper-yelled. And now Busan's hottest emotionally unavailable CEO is standing outside the lounge looking at you like he's one inconvenience away from fighting God himself. Several students nearby immediately looked over at that. Amara covered her face instantly. Please stop talking. I will not stop talking. Changho's mouth twitched slightly near the doorway. Traitor. Raylan looked between them again before her expression slowly shifted from outrage to realization. Oh my God, she whispered. You're in love. Amara's entire body went still. Because the terrifying part was, the bond reacted before she did. Warmth surged sharply through her chest. Changho felt it instantly from across the room. And judging from the dangerously satisfied look now sitting on his face, he absolutely noticed. Raylan's eyes widened dramatically. Oh my God, you are. Raylan, Amara warned. Raylan completely ignored her. That man has been looking at you for like 30 seconds straight without blinking. Amara glanced toward the doorway instinctively. Huge mistake. Because Changho was still watching her exactly the way Raylan described. Completely focused. Completely calm. Like the rest of the room barely existed. The heat climbing into Amara's face became immediate. Raylan saw that too. Oh, this is bad, she whispered with delight. This is deep, deep. Amara grabbed her friend's arm and pulled her farther into the lounge before she embarrassed her into another dimension. You are enjoying this way too much. I thought you were dead 3 days ago. Raylan shot back instantly. Let me have this. That sobered Amara immediately. The humor softened between them for a second as the reality of that statement settled back into the conversation. Raylan looked at her carefully. You really scared me. Amara's chest tightened again. I know. The sincerity in her voice softened Raylan instantly. Several quieter seconds passed before Raylan finally sighed and looked back toward the doorway again where Changho still stood speaking briefly with one of the professors near the hall. Then she leaned closer toward Amara. So, her eyes narrowed suspiciously. How rich is he exactly? Amara burst out laughing so hard several nearby students looked over again. And for the first time since the kidnapping, the sound felt completely normal. By lunchtime, Amara regretted bringing Changho to campus. Not because he was doing anything wrong. Because apparently the entire university had functioning eyes. The graduate courtyard had become noticeably louder the second Changho walked into it beside her. Students tried pretending they weren't staring. They failed. Badly. Amara caught at least 4 people looking up his name on their phones while pretending to study, and two girls near the coffee stand nearly walked directly into each other, because Changho removed his coat halfway through crossing the courtyard. Unfortunately, Amara understood the distraction immediately. Changho looked unfair. That was the only word her brain could settle on. The black button-down stretched tightly across his chest and shoulders. The sleeves rolled just high enough to expose powerful forearms lined with veins that flexed every time he adjusted his grip on the iced coffee he was carrying for her. Dark slacks fit his thighs in a way that should have honestly counted as psychological warfare, especially combined with the controlled confidence in the way he moved through campus. And then there was his face. Sharp jaw, dark brows, storm-gray eyes that always looked intense even when he was calm. His black hair sat slightly messier than usual today after running his hand through it repeatedly during meetings that morning, leaving several strands falling loosely across his forehead in a way Amara found genuinely irritating. Mostly because half the women on campus seemed to agree with her. "You're glaring at strangers." Changho's voice pulled her out of her thoughts instantly. Amara blinked. "What? You've looked ready to fight 3 separate students in the last 5 minutes. That is an exaggeration." Changho took a slow sip of his coffee while looking completely unconvinced. "One of them was literally just asking me where the library was." She knew where the library was. A faint smile pulled at his mouth immediately. Amara narrowed her eyes. "You are enjoying this way too much." "I'm enjoying you." That answer hit harder than it should have. The bond warmed instantly. "Traitor." They crossed toward the outdoor seating area near the business building while students openly watched them pass. Some recognized Changho immediately. Others simply reacted to him instinctively. Confidence followed him everywhere. Not loud arrogance. Not showmanship. Something worse. The kind of calm authority that made people look at him even when he wasn't trying. And standing beside him all afternoon while women openly stared was quickly becoming a test of Amara's patience. The breaking point came near the fountain courtyard. A tall woman stepped directly into Changho's path with enough confidence that several nearby students immediately slowed down to watch. Amara recognized her vaguely. Beautiful. Elegant. Definitely a wolf. And judging by the subtle scent shift moving through the bond, Changho recognized her too. "Changho." The woman smiled easily, dark hair falling over one shoulder as her eyes moved openly over him. "It's been a while." Changho remained polite but unreadable. "Yuri." Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Too familiar. Way too familiar." Yuri finally looked toward Amara with polite curiosity before returning her attention to Changho almost immediately. "My father mentioned the conflict in Busan was resolved," she said smoothly. "I'm glad to see you survived it." "My condolences," Changho answered dryly. Amara nearly choked trying not to laugh. Yuri smiled anyway. "So the rumors are true then?" Changho's expression stayed calm. "Which rumors?" "That you finally bonded." The way she said finally immediately annoyed Amara. Yuri's attention shifted toward the fading mark beneath Amara's hair before she smiled knowingly. "Your Luna is beautiful." Amara expected jealousy to ease slightly after hearing that. It didn't. Especially not when Yuri looked back at Changho afterward with obvious history still sitting behind her eyes. "We're hosting an alliance gathering in Seoul next month," Yuri continued. "My father would expect you there." Changho nodded once. "Send the details." Yuri's gaze lingered on him another second too long before she finally stepped aside. "It was good seeing you again." Then she walked away. Amara stayed quiet for several seconds after Yuri disappeared into the crowd. Changho noticed immediately. "You're thinking too loud." Amara crossed her arms. "She was flirting with you. She was being political. She practically undressed you with her eyes." Changho looked genuinely thoughtful for a second. "You did that first." Amara stared at him in disbelief. Then she realized he wasn't joking. The worst part, the bond confirmed it immediately. Heat rushed straight into her face. Changho's mouth twitched slightly as he stepped closer. "You're jealous." "I am not jealous." "You felt possessive before she even introduced herself." Amara looked away instantly. Huge mistake. Because now she noticed more women staring again. One girl near the student center openly paused mid-conversation, just to watch Changho roll his sleeves higher up his forearms. Amara's eye twitched. Changho stepped directly into her space before lowering his voice near her ear. "You know what's interesting?" Amara refused to look at him. "What?" "I haven't looked at a single one of them." The bond pulsed warmly beneath her skin. And annoyingly enough, she knew he was telling the truth. Changho's hand settled slowly against her waist. Calm. Possessive. Certain. Then he leaned down just enough for his mouth to brush lightly near the mark beneath her ear. Not enough to scandalize the entire campus. Definitely enough to make her knees weak. You smell territorial, he murmured quietly. Amara hated how much that affected her, especially when his low laugh followed immediately after. By the time the sun disappeared behind the Busan skyline, the city had softened into color and light. Neon signs reflected across rain-darkened streets, while music drifted from restaurants near the waterfront. The salty air rolling in from the ocean carried the scent of grilled food, rain, and traffic as crowds moved through the evening streets around Gwangali Beach. Amara stood near the railing overlooking the water, while the bridge lights shimmered across the waves in the distance. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't waiting for something terrible to happen, and that realization alone almost overwhelmed her. You disappeared into your head again. Changho's voice came quietly from behind her before his coat settled across her shoulders. The warmth wrapped around her immediately. Amara smiled faintly as she pulled the coat closer around herself. You make that sound like a medical condition. Changho stepped beside her at the railing, one hand sliding naturally against her lower back. With you, it might be. She laughed softly under her breath, and the sound eased something in his chest instantly. The bond reacted to it too. Changho had started noticing that more over the last few days. Her emotions moved through him more clearly now, but so did his reactions to her. The bond tightened whenever she laughed, relaxed whenever she touched him, and sharpened violently any time fear brushed too close to her thoughts. It was becoming impossible to separate instinct from emotion anymore. Earlier that evening, Changho had taken her through half the city without warning. Street vendors, oceanfront restaurants, late-night dessert shops. At one point he stood silently holding her purse while she argued with a vendor over souvenirs she absolutely did not need. Amara caught several wolves from nearby territories recognizing him throughout the night, but Changho barely acknowledged any of them. Every time someone approached, his attention drifted back to her within seconds like the rest of the city had become background noise. And if she was honest with herself, that level of focus affected her more than she knew how to explain. A little girl near the beach had stopped them almost an hour earlier to sell flowers. Amara still hadn't emotionally recovered from it. The child looked between them once before asking Changho, very seriously, if he wanted flowers for his wife. Changho almost answered yes. Amara watched the word physically reach the edge of his mouth before he stopped himself. The memory still made her chest warm every time she thought about it. Now they stood together overlooking the water while the city moved around them. Changho rested both hands against the railing beside her, his shoulders finally looking less tense than they had since the kidnapping. No meetings. No rogues. No pack politics. Just this. Just them. Amara looked over at him quietly. You look different tonight. Changho glanced toward her. Different how? Lighter. The corner of his mouth moved slightly before his eyes drifted back toward the water. I haven't had a reason to relax in a while. The honesty in his voice settled heavily between them, because Amara understood exactly what he meant. The last several weeks had changed both of them in ways neither fully understood yet. She still woke up some mornings hearing wolves moving through the compound before she even opened her eyes. Changho still checked for her in bed several times a night whenever the bond shifted unexpectedly. Neither of them had returned to normal. Maybe they never would. Amara rested her arms against the railing and stared out toward the bridge lights reflecting across the water. You know what scares me now? Changho turned toward her immediately. Not cautiously. Attentively. Like every emotion she carried mattered to him automatically now. Amara swallowed once before answering. It's not the rogues anymore. The ocean breeze moved softly through her hair while emotion tightened in her chest. It's realizing how much it would have hurt if I never saw you again. Changho's breathing changed almost immediately beside her. The bond pulled tighter between them with enough force that Amara physically felt the reaction move through his body. For several quiet seconds, he said nothing. Then his hand lifted slowly toward her face. The touch stayed gentle when his fingers brushed against her cheek, but the emotion behind it hit her hard enough to make her chest ache. You did see me again, he said quietly. The words sounded simple, but she felt what they cost him to say. Amara looked up at him slowly. The city lights reflected in his storm-gray eyes while the ocean moved behind him, and suddenly she saw past the alpha entirely. past the control, past the dominance, past the terrifying reputation that followed him through Busan. Right now she was looking at a man who loved her so deeply it frightened him. And somehow, instead of running from that realization, she stepped closer. Changho's hand slid behind her neck immediately, his thumb resting near the fading mark hidden beneath her hair. I didn't understand the bond before, Amara admitted softly. Changho held her gaze. And now, Amara felt emotion rise into her throat before she answered. Now I think losing you would destroy me too. The confession landed between them heavily. The bond surged warm around her chest so suddenly that tears burned her eyes before she could stop them. Changho closed his eyes briefly, like the words physically reached inside him. Because they had. When he kissed her, the emotion behind it nearly stole her breath. There was no panic left in him tonight. No desperation. No fear that she would disappear the second he let himself feel too much. This kiss came from somewhere deeper. From relief. From trust. From finally allowing himself to believe they survived. Changho kissed her slowly beneath the lights of Busan, while waves crashed softly below the bridge, and music drifted through the streets behind them. And standing there wrapped in his arms with the bond moving warmly between their hearts, Amara realized she had never experienced love that felt this complete before. Not temporary. Not conditional. Not halfway given. Changho loved her with his entire soul. And somewhere along the way, she had started loving him the same way. When the kiss ended, Changho rested his forehead gently against hers. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The city kept moving around them. Cars passed in the distance. The ocean rolled steadily beneath the bridge. Rain cooled the air drifting through the streets. And for the first time since arriving in Korea, the future stopped feeling terrifying to Amara. Because no matter how impossible this life had become, she no longer had to face it alone. Amara realized she was basically living in Changho's apartment when she opened one of the bathroom drawers and found her skincare products organized beside his. She stared at them for several seconds. Then she looked over at Changho, who stood near the kitchen island scrolling through something on his phone like this was completely normal behavior. You reorganized my stuff. Changho didn't look up. You were digging through cabinets every morning. That's because I don't officially live here. You sleep here every night. That is not the same thing. Now he looked up. The calm expression on his face made it immediately obvious he disagreed completely. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while the city lights of Busan glowed below them. Changho's apartment sat high enough above the harbor district that the entire skyline stretched beyond the glass walls in waves of neon and reflection. The place itself looked exactly like him. Clean lines. Dark colors. Minimal decoration. Everything expensive without trying too hard to look expensive. And somehow, over the last week, Amara had started leaving pieces of herself inside it without even noticing. A hoodie hanging over one of the chairs. Hair products in the bathroom. Textbooks stacked near the couch. A spare pair of shoes beside the door. The realization should have made her panic. Instead, it made something warm settle in her chest. Changho crossed toward her slowly and took the skincare bottle from her hand before placing it back into the drawer. You looked offended. I'm trying to figure out when this became our apartment. Changho slid the drawer shut calmly. You noticed that too? Amara stared at him. The completely serious expression on his face nearly broke her. You are dangerously comfortable with this. I'm dangerously comfortable with you. The bond warmed instantly. Traitor. Amara walked back toward the kitchen while trying not to smile too hard. Changho followed her without thinking, his body naturally tracking hers through the apartment the same way it always did now. She noticed it constantly. If she moved rooms, eventually he appeared nearby. If she sat down somewhere, he unconsciously touched her within minutes. A hand against her back. Fingers brushing hers. Her legs across his lap during meetings he pretended she wasn't distracting him through. And somehow none of it felt forced anymore. It felt natural. Like the bond had quietly rewritten both of them around each other. You're staring again, she said while opening the refrigerator. Changho leaned one shoulder against the counter, openly watching her. You're wearing my clothes. Amara looked down at the oversized black shirt hanging off one shoulder. It's comfortable. It looks better on you. Her entire face warmed instantly. Changho noticed. Of course he noticed. Amara grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator, mostly to give herself something to do, while he looked at her like that. You know, she said carefully, Normal couples usually date longer before accidentally moving in together. Changho's expression barely changed. We almost died. That is not a healthy relationship timeline. It adjusted my priorities. Amara laughed softly despite herself. The sound pulled a quieter expression across his face immediately. Something softer. More open. The version of Changho almost nobody else ever saw. He crossed the kitchen slowly until he stood directly in front of her. Amara's breath caught slightly when his hands settled against her waist. Not because she wasn't used to him touching her anymore. Because every touch still carried emotion through the bond. And right now, Changho felt unusually calm. Content. The realization hit her harder than she expected. This apartment used to feel empty to him. Now it smelled like her shampoo, her books cluttered half the living room, and her laughter had somehow worked its way into spaces that probably hadn't heard much of it before. And deep down, he loved it. "You're doing it again," Changho murmured. Amara blinked once. Doing what? Thinking too loud. She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You are never letting that phrase go, are you?" "No." A smile finally broke across her face completely. Changho's eyes softened immediately at the sight of it. Then his thumb brushed slowly across her waist beneath the fabric of his shirt still hanging from her body. The movement shifted the atmosphere between them instantly. Amara felt it. So did he. The bond tightened warmly as Changho lowered his head slightly toward hers. "Stay tonight." Amara stared at him for a second before laughing quietly. "I've stayed every night this week." "I know. Then why ask like that?" Because this wasn't really about sleeping over. She realized that the second the emotion behind the words moved through the bond. Changho wasn't asking for convenience. He was asking her to choose this space with him. To choose him again. Amara's expression softened immediately. Her hand lifted slowly against his chest, fingers spreading over the steady heartbeat she could now hear even without focusing. "I'm already here," she said quietly. The look that crossed Changho's face after that nearly melted her where she stood. Not because he looked dominant. Not because he looked powerful. Because for one completely unguarded second, he looked relieved. Rain rolled steadily against the windows while the lights of Busan glowed beneath the apartment skyline. Amara lay stretched across Changho's chest beneath the blankets, absent-mindedly tracing the faint scars scattered along his ribs, while his hand rested against her thigh beneath the oversized shirt she had stolen from him earlier that night. The room stayed quiet except for the storm outside, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. A heartbeat she could hear now without trying. The realization still felt surreal sometimes. Changho looked down at her slowly. Over the last several weeks, Amara had quietly taken over parts of his life without realizing she was doing it. Her textbooks sat stacked beside his office desk. Her hair products crowded his bathroom counter. Half the kitchen suddenly carried foods he never used to buy because she liked them. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, his apartment stopped feeling empty. The strange part was how quickly he became unable to imagine it any other way. "You disappeared into your head again." Amara's voice pulled him from his thoughts as her fingers continued moving slowly across his chest. Changho looked mildly offended. "That accusation sounds familiar." "It should. You do it constantly. You're currently using me as a mattress while criticizing me." Amara smiled faintly against his skin. "You seem emotionally strong enough to survive it." A quiet laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Amara felt the sound vibrate through his chest beneath her cheek, and warmth spread gently through the bond almost immediately afterward. She loved hearing him laugh like this. Not the controlled amusement he used around the pack. This version. The one that only appeared when his guard lowered around her completely. Amara tilted her head slightly so she could look up at him. "You've changed." Changho's fingers moved slowly against her thigh. "That sounds dangerous." "I'm serious." The teasing faded slightly from her expression. "Before all of this, you always felt so far away from everybody." Changho looked toward the rain beyond the windows for a moment before answering. "I was." The honesty in his voice tightened something softly inside her chest. Because Changho never lied to her when it mattered. He exhaled slowly before looking back down at her again. "I spent most of my life thinking being alpha meant carrying everything by myself." His thumb brushed lightly against her skin. Responsibility. Fear. Every decision. Amara stayed quiet, listening carefully. Then Changho's expression softened in a way that still affected her every single time she saw it. "And then you showed up," he said quietly. "And suddenly being alone started feeling worse than being vulnerable." The confession hit her harder than she expected. Not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded completely true. Amara pushed herself up slowly until she hovered over him, her hair falling around her shoulders while city lights moved softly across Changho's face beneath her. He looked exhausted, healing, protective, beautiful in a way that still caught her off guard when she looked at him too long. And somewhere along the way, loving him had stopped feeling frightening. Now it felt inevitable. Her hand slid slowly along his jaw. I think I fell in love with you before I even understood what was happening. Changho's eyes stayed locked on hers. When? Amara smiled faintly. Probably around the time you started threatening people for looking at me. That narrows absolutely nothing down. She laughed softly before emotions settled back into her expression again. No, she admitted quietly. It was earlier than that. Changho's hand tightened slightly against her waist. How much earlier? Amara held his gaze for several seconds before answering honestly. The first time I realized you looked at me like I mattered. The room fell quiet after that. Changho stared up at her while the bond wrapped warmly between them, carrying the full weight of the confession straight into his chest. Because Amara didn't fully understand what those words meant to him. Most people respected him. Many feared him. Very few had ever truly seen him beneath the alpha. But she did. And somehow she loved him anyway. Changho's hand moved slowly into her hair before he pulled her down into a kiss. The emotion behind it nearly overwhelmed her immediately. Every fear, every moment of relief, every quiet piece of trust they built together over the last several months moved through the bond while his mouth softened against hers. Amara melted into him instantly. The kiss deepened slowly, naturally, until her body settled fully against his while his arms wrapped securely around her beneath the blankets. There was no distance left between them anymore. Not emotionally, not physically, not anywhere the bond could reach. Changho rolled them carefully until Amara rested beneath him against the mattress, his body settling between her thighs while his forehead rested gently against hers. You changed everything, he whispered. Amara's fingers slid through his hair slowly. So did you. The honesty between them felt almost unbearably intimate now, because neither of them were hiding anymore. Not after the war. Not after the bond. Not after surviving the thought of losing each other. Changho kissed her again, slower this time, while rain continued falling against the windows beyond the bed. Amara felt his heartbeat beneath her hands. He felt the emotion moving through her chest. And somewhere in the middle of the storm, the city lights and the warmth wrapped around them beneath tangled sheets. Both of them finally stopped feeling like they were surviving. For the first time since they met, they were simply allowed to love each other. The rooftop was quiet this late at night. Wind moved softly through the upper levels of the harbor district while Busan stretched endlessly beneath the skyline in waves of neon, traffic, and reflected light across dark water. Amara stood near the edge of the rooftop terrace wrapped in one of Changho's hoodies, her arms folded loosely against the cool night air while she stared out over the city. A few months ago, this place had felt enormous to her. Foreign, temporary. Now she knew which streets stayed busy past midnight, which cafes near campus opened early enough for graduate students running on no sleep, which parts of the harbor Changho avoided when he needed silence. Busan no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt lived in. The rooftop door opened quietly behind her. Amara smiled faintly before even turning around. You're getting predictable. Changho stepped onto the rooftop carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You disappeared. I went upstairs. You disappeared upstairs. Amara laughed softly as he crossed toward her. The sound immediately loosened the tension he still carried instinctively anytime he lost track of her for too long. Some habits from the kidnapping hadn't faded yet. Maybe they never fully would. Changho stopped beside her near the railing before handing her one of the mugs. The warmth spread instantly through her hands. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together overlooking the city while traffic lights moved below them like rivers of color through the streets. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt settled. Amara looked out across Busan slowly. When I first came here, she said quietly, I thought this whole experience would just be a chapter in my life. Changho listened without interrupting. I was supposed to finish school, experience living abroad, maybe fall in love with the city a little. She smiled faintly into her coffee. Then eventually go home. Changho's eyes shifted toward her at that word. Home. Amara felt the reaction through the bond immediately. Not fear exactly. but something close to it. She turned toward him slowly. That's the weird part now. Changho stayed quiet. Amara stepped a little closer until her shoulder brushed lightly against his. I don't think home means the same thing to me anymore. The wind moved softly through her hair while emotion tightened warmly in her chest. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling temporary. Her eyes lifted toward him fully now. You stopped feeling temporary. Changho looked at her for several long seconds. The city lights reflected faintly across his face while emotion moved quietly through the bond between them. Amara felt all of it. The relief. The love. The disbelief that someone had chosen to stay beside him this completely. His hand settled slowly against the back of her neck beneath the hood of his sweatshirt. You know, he said quietly, you completely destroyed my ability to function normally. Amara smiled immediately. That sounds dramatic. I used to enjoy silence. And now, Changho's thumb brushed gently against her skin. Now I look for you in every room. The confession hit her so hard she stopped breathing for a second. Because she knew he meant it literally. The alpha bond. The instinct. The love underneath both. Changho searched for her constantly now, without even realizing he was doing it. And deep down, she searched for him too. Amara set her coffee aside carefully before stepping fully into him. Changho's arms wrapped around her immediately like they belonged there. Maybe they did now. She rested her cheek against his chest while the city stretched endlessly around them beneath the night sky. No rogues. No war. No fear. Just this moment. This man. This impossible life she somehow couldn't imagine walking away from anymore. I think I'm home, she whispered softly. Changho held her tighter. And somewhere above the lights of Busan, with the bond moving warmly between their hearts, and the future finally opening in front of them instead of chasing behind, Amara realized she meant it completely.